Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Oh, thanks, Chelsea. Hi, folks. Come on in and welcome to session 3. And there's 2 more chairs on the couch here. Great. Well, let's get underway if we can. This is session 3. Not quite halfway through, but moving along nicely. I'm very pleased the way the discussion sites are going. It's falling in nicely. We have completed assignment week number 1. We try to get that strategist perspective, try to get the new mental models, just some tidbits, some concepts, some notions of just maybe some things that might help you retune, readjust, reset to the mindset of a strategist. There's more there to do, but it was a start. Certainly the stormtroopers was a good little exercise for those that took it and were successful in completely missing, as I did the first time out, the stormtroopers walking right straight across. Because you get so focused in your day job on what you're instantly doing that you're missing the stormtroopers walking around. And that's why I underscore the importance of you taking 20 minutes each day to yourself, closing the door, and just make it your quiet time. Just set it up with the people you work with, that this is your peep, no calls, no interruptions. You just want 20 minutes to yourself to have that cup of coffee and look at the wall. I know that's difficult, but that's what's going to transform you from management to leadership, is acquiring this extra wisdom, this critical thinking, this reflective thought about your business, your organization, and what's going on in the world and how it's going to impact your business. In the second week, we got underway with a little red toolbox and some tools, and I pointed out there's only about 5 or 6 that we might normally go to almost first choice as tools to build whatever we're building. And we talked about those last week, and they're kind of set out nicely in your little black book if you need them. In the little black book, you'll find in the Boston Matrix, one of the axes are reversed, and I apologize for that. The publisher said they'd change it, but when they did the proofreading, they sent me the text but not the figures, and they got in, not making excuses, just I missed it somehow. And they said they'd adjust it, but it hasn't been adjusted yet. And now we're moving off into session 3. Your first assignment you by now have submitted last night. This is theoretically Monday morning. I'll be underway marking those. It was a simple little exercise, just a short little PowerPoint presentation. No APA necessary, no cover pages necessary, just identify who it is. And it's only worth 5 marks, but it was to get a sense of this Internet of Everything and a particular innovative idea that will migrate over into your assignment 2, which is the full Monty. It's 2,000 words and appendixes, cover pages, table of contents. Not really, I'm going to count those in the 2,000 words. And to the extent that 2,000 words, yeah, it means 2,000 words, but I don't want you wasting your time wordsmithing, trying to bring it down to 2,000 words. If it's 2,400 words, it's not a big issue with me. It's not so much a word count and filling a box. It's about you, if you have something to say, say it. And for me, I still go back to the substance rather than the form. So please don't waste time trying to get it down to 2,000 words or up to 2,000 words exactly. If you finish saying what you have to say, close it off. I mean, don't give me 5,000 words. I'm not looking for that, but don't spend a lot of time trying to ratchet it down. It's just not worth your time and effort, and your time is too important as we do it. What else do you want to chat? I made a little note here. Part of what we're I think it's emerging through the fog in our discussions. You're getting some sense of the potential threat to workers in Canada. And I sent a chart out, and if you haven't, let me know, but I think you've seen that little graph that's saying where the job's going to be, sort of down and to the left, saying 80% of the jobs that are repetitive. It won't be long for AI and machines pick up on that and are able to do that. And it's the ones out here in the tail, the other 20%, that is where the jobs are going to be. And but as a result of that, we're going to have this great large mass of folks that Montreal textile workers and the truck drivers, 225,000 blue-collar worker truck drivers, many of which are going to have to be retooled. And at age 40, that's hard to do. Some of you are age 40 coming back to university, but you've had a position of being in management for a while, but you've been driving a truck for most of your life. It's going to be hard to get into a program like this to retool. Very difficult. And so what to do about that? And I'm going to suggest 2 concepts, notions for a brief discussion this week. One is the concept of a flat tax, and Trump is coming close to that with his 3 tiers of 15, 25, and 15, 20, and 25% flat tax, and theoretically be able to submit your claim on a postcard that size. I hope he gets there with it, because right now our tax system is so convoluted that pink elephants on a Sunday through your living room qualify you for a deduction. And so if you have accountants, if you have access to law firms, you can find those deductions. And so Buffett and others quite gleefully tell you they pay less tax than their secretary because they get all the supports to take the time and to do this right and make sure they don't step into the mud. But most of us don't have that luxury. And so you spend an awful lot of your time during the year just collecting pieces of paper, a lot of time for a week getting ready to take it down to the accountant. The accountant wastes time doing it. Revenue Canada wastes time checking it. And on it goes. It's just such a waste of productivity. It adds nothing to the GMP of Canada. And I have a saying, I guess the Irish saying, that it doesn't produce any potatoes. It'd be far better if we could ratchet this down to a flat tax that basically says the numbers 15%, 18%, Hong Kong, other jurisdictions do this. You pay tax on everything over 18%. Pay tax everything over a certain threshold of, say, $24,000, $30,000. You set the number up to $30,000, no tax whatsoever. Over $30,000, that extra $1, you'll pay 15% or 18% or 15 cents or 18 cents on that dollar as you go forward. That would be nice and simple. No effort required. It would completely close off the underground economy in Canada. Is reported to be as high as $20 billion, that tax fatigue and driving people to do and pay cash underneath the counter. All that would be dissipated. It would come down quite dramatically, and that's more revenue for the government. So maybe this week we could talk a little bit about flat tax and the need for it. In every American election, as far back as I can remember, somebody, whether it was Forbes was one, I think Cruz in the last election, Trump here, are all proponents of this idea of simplifying the tax code to something like a flat tax, something you and I can fill in and get it completed rather than the forms we have now and interpretation bulletins that we don't know what the tax law really is. So that's a good topic for this week. The other one about these folks that are laying on the street corners and no work, much like the Romans, we have to find something for them to do. And otherwise you'll have like the Arab Spring we talked about last week going on. So the concept of a guaranteed annual income that every man, woman, and child, and the number, just pick a number, but for today's purposes, I'll say $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the family. That's $4,000 a month. That's for $48,000 a year worth of revenue for a family of four, guaranteed coming in every year for the families. And we'll talk in a minute where all that comes from. But all the other supports disappear. Old age pensions disappear, student loans disappear, social welfare services disappear. What other things? All the other government supports, all the offices, all the departments that administrate all this social services and one thing or another all disappear. The folks on the street get their $1,000, and that should buy them a room somewhere and the basic foods. And it's not clawed back like now. A single mom with a child goes out and tries to make a few extra dollars on the side. The government takes a piece of those extra dollars back in as a tax, and it discourages them from trying to get up off the ground. So you say, here's your $1,000. That's enough to at least make sure you got a roof over your shoulders or over your head. Not so much in big cities, but in other cities. Got a room over your head and some very basic foods. But now go work. Go take these jobs that they're advertising right now for clerks in McDonald's and shopping malls, etc. at the basic wage of $10, $15 an hour. And do that. Try to better yourselves. And that money you can keep. So now you have $1,000 plus that. And as a result, you're better off. But if we close down all the government departments, I think you'll find if you start adding them all up and the salaries of government employees and the golden handshakes and the high pension plans, I think you'll find there's a great source in there that will serve us a step. But it's worth a discussion. Flat tax, guaranteed annual income for this week. Why don't we look at that and see what happens? Well, there we have it, folks. Once again, we've picked up the first 9 minutes from the last offering. Saves repeating and recording it twice. Much of it applies. We have, of course, discussed the guaranteed annual income. I don't think much more has to be said about that. But the guaranteed annual income applied at the same time as a flat tax, there's much to be said for that. And again, I say I think it's time that we look at a cost-benefit analysis of both of those to see if they have merit, worth looking at. Certainly something has to be done. Today in the paper, I've got a lot to cover today, but I'm going to try to be respectful again of your time. And about another 30 minutes or so, and then I'll pack it up. But Ontario is looking at drug firms who are making payments to doctors to provide certain treatments in their office. And of course, the largest line item for pretty well all governments across Canada is that for healthcare for the folks within their province. And the result of that, they guard jealously this pot of money. And so we have, like in this province, private clinics offering MRIs and competing with the government because they can put people through quickly. People like myself waiting for a back splice, been about a year to go through the process, got another couple months to go, and some pain, some stiffness as a result of that. But there's just such a lineup to get in. And so when the private sector comes along and says we can do it faster, but charges for it, the powers to be say no, that's an encroachment on our territory and the Healthcare Act and the basket of services that we have agreed to provide. So this week we could look at it, but I think you've got to come away with a sense, it seems to me, that I won't say the system is broken, but certainly there's lots of fissures appearing and something has to be done about it. So maybe this week a little bit of talk about what can we do for the healthcare services in Canada? Are they adequate? Do they need some, and will the Internet of Everything be the solution? I think in a large part it may well bring some relief as this starts to unfold on labor costs. But worth a talk, but certainly this idea of firm payment to doctors by drug firms is in question. We want to discuss that too. In Surrey, one of the major cities outside of Vancouver, but all part of the complex there of the Greater Vancouver area, is debating about SkyTrain and what SkyTrain out in their area and improve upon the SkyTrain out in their area. And so that's opening up into a regional battle as to who gets what. And that's a symptom for a larger issue that we could talk about in this class, is that again our friend Porter has put another model out, the dimensions on why, for example, some nations are more competitive than others. And he puts out 4 sort of factors to consider. One that he puts out is it's called factor endowments. And there are 2 types. There's the basic factor endowments that a country like Canada, with 25% of the world's water and gold and oil and large mass and low population, etc., is blessed. And if countries have those sort of basic factor endowments, then generally they can be quite competitive on the market. Saudi Arabia is blessed with cheap oil. Just scratch the line in the sand and you've got oil and cheap oil to produce and draw back out of the sand. And so it has a competitive advantage over neighbors that, like Iceland, that they don't have that resource. But you can also, countries can do something to improve that factor endowment called advanced factor endowments, Porter talks about. And these are things we can do, like intermodal transportation that 2 of the teams are doing for us in their study, and I hope they'll be posted, put a site up there that will post those papers, if you wish, to share that intellectual capital with everybody in the classrooms, because I think we can all learn from what's going on in other businesses and sectors, and so that's one of the things we talk about. So the more we have education and get on top of this Internet of Everything and research and development and put the schools in place and intermodal transportation in place, broadband, 5G, the more you put these things in place for a nation, again, the more competitive that nation is going to be over those that don't have it. And so here's an example of the need recognized by Surrey's mayor to get that advanced factor endowment in his city, because it's going to improve the competitiveness of Surrey over the surrounding cities that don't have the SkyTrain yet. So it's worth looking at. We've talked a lot about Saudi and what's going on there, and not much more we can say about it other than I keep underscoring the point that the flash of the obvious is the 1973 agreement, when the Americans came off the gold standard, and the deal was worked out with Kissinger with the Saudis to buy oil in US dollars, and in return the Americans would hold the kingdom in power, and the Saudis would take the dollars they got and buy US treasuries, and that system's worked pretty well. And as a result, the Saudis have stayed in power since 1973, the kingdom, and on the other side the Americans have had the dominance of the global vehicle currency because there's an appetite for it and a ready market to buy their treasury bills, their loans, which is going. But that may be in jeopardy if depending on what the settlement's all about. If the schism takes place between the Saudis and Americans, yes, there'll be a loss of arms and all the arms contracts, etc., etc. But the real loss will be, and the danger for us will be as Canadians, is what would happen if the American dollar lost its support as a global vehicle currency, and under the Quran, things like the drachma, gold, become the the unit of choice among Muslims, which are the largest population in the world, and there are drachmas in Malaysia and other places right now as a currency, or just the other 5 currencies in the basket of vehicle currencies approved by the IMF, which includes the Chinese currency and the euro and those other alternatives. So we watch this closely. It has the impact to be quite disruptive to us. Indeed, the prince got ticked off with Canada about 2 years ago. We had a number of wonderful Saudi students attending our graduate courses here, and we lost them all overnight because a snit-on for Canada, so they withdrew all their Canadian students out of Canada, and so they're missed. I enjoy them. In fact, we had students with, like I mentioned to you, we had MBA students in Iran, and we lost them. Okay, let's see what else we got in here. Notley, again, this is Factor Endowment story. Notley, Alberta Premier, talking that he wants the federal government to invest more in the 2 railway lines that move the wheat from the prairies and move the oil from the prairies, primarily to the coast. And Notley, particularly with oil, they're landlocked. They're trying to get their stuff down south through the pipelines and meeting with opposition. They're trying to get it out here and meeting with opposition. And so, again, all the wealth and resources, those basic factor endowments that Alberta has, they can't get out of there without better intermodal transportation, without infrastructure in place. And so they're trying to persuade the federal government to do more. About 5 years ago, I seem to recall that there was such a bumper crop of grains on the prairies, they couldn't get it out. There weren't enough grain cars to move it to the coast, and as a result, it rotted away in the silos and one thing or another. So it's important that we look at our supply chains and manage those things correctly. And she's making the point that with respect to oil and grain, that may not be the case, and we need to relook at this all. Carbon tax rebates for 4 provinces, looking at that, and caught my eye here that on January the 1st in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick, they're going to start paying that $20 a ton for carbon tax. The result is directly 4.3 cents a litre, and in the old days, I would tell you that was close to 17, 18 cents a gallon overnight. The price of gasoline in those provinces will jump up. The so what, of course, is that businesses, airplane, taxi drivers, etc., all are going to have an extra 18 cents a gallon cost come January the 1st, each and every day for the unit. The cost of fuel oil. The Maritimes are cold in the winter months, and so this is what we're going to pay for this carbon tax credit to go into the system and to redistribution to go to those nations like China and India to help them catch up. We can talk a bit about that. There's a chance for NAFTA. The NASA is working on the moon for another little visit and wants to put a floating space station to orbit the moon, just go around the dark and the bright side of it and look at it. And Canada has always put the Canada arm in place. May not get full recognition, but on most of the things that are up there, there's a Canada arm with a Canadian maple leaf on that does things. And it's McDonald Detwire, I think, put a lot of that together in Richmond, in British Columbia. Is responsible, good engineers, good firm, McDonald Detwire. And but now they're talking that this thing will be robotics. That where before it was move left, move right, do this, do that. Now it's simply going to say do the task, and the robotics, artificial intelligence will take over, and even be more efficient, more effective. Things that we're talking about now in the Internet of Everything. And so good for them, and it's important we do this R&D back in here. But the sad thing is, NAFTA had a dream, a vision, when Kennedy said we'll get to the moon by the end of the decade. They were fired up. They were doing something. It's been 60 years. We've not been back to the moon for whatever reason. And other nations are moving quickly and closing the gap and having a series of effective wins. So it's something we could look at that a little bit about maybe we haven't been back to the moon. Should we be involved? NASA's lost its way. It's not as active as it should be. But on the good side of it, companies like Amazon and Musk, Tesla, are very active in putting their rockets up. And their rockets are 10 times cheaper and 3 times 10 times cheaper and 3 times something else. I forget what it does. Oh, faster to get it up. I guess get it faster in getting them up. In any event, the private sector are doing marvelous things on rockets these days, much better than NASA could even dream of doing. They're talking about Mars, they're talking about the moon, they're talking about colonization, they're talking 200 years out of actually terraforming Mars. The water's been found, glaciers just shoveled depth, large peaks, fresh water. They're finding salt water underneath because of the new systems of being X-ray to find out what's underneath the ground. They believe all the elements are there, but it'll take about 200 years to go through all the steps you have to go through to terraform that Martia. In fact, the interesting thing I was read the other day is what would we call the first baby born on Mars, and obviously a Martian. And so it's interesting to think about. Certainly, for you and I, we won't be around to see it, but it's interesting to think of what's just out in front of us, and it's already starting. But it also leads me to think on. Arising out of that, the question for us in strategy is strategic leadership. You have Musk, and just from what I read, I've never met the man, but Musk, I sense, is that driving power, determined, heads down, John Wayne, Aristotle, he wants the credit, wants his name up in lights, wants to leave a legacy behind, and is pushing hard in all directions. As many fingers and hands as he can point with, he's doing it in all directions and doing a lot of things that are good. Look at his leadership style, and then go to the Amazon bozo's leadership style. A little slower. Of course, he's the richest man in the world. He's got bags of money, and he says, I can put $1 billion here and get a rocket up and never miss the $1 billion just by selling off a few shares. And his company are just letting them through attrition the way they're going up. So you've got those two types of leaders, but very strong-willed on top of it, charismatic. I read a little article in the paper too about Chip Wilson from Lululemon. Recall that disastrous comments he made about heavy ladies in black leotards, etc., and then he got boosted off his own board. But again, he's one of the richest Canadians. There's something like $3.6 billion in his kitty. He wants to come back in. He's 63 years old right now. He wants to get back into the board, maybe not into Lululemon, though I think he'd like to. But I think the question I'd like to discuss is look at some of these leaders at this point. Lee Iacocca was another one from Chrysler. All these leaders, their name was so embedded on the organization that if Lee left, if Musk left, if Chip Wilson was to leave, there were serious concerns about would the organization continue. And I think the message I'd like to get across today is some of these charismatic leaders, they're wonderful, but I think the best leadership in the world for you and I to model is the one that plans for succession planning, that they can leave their organization and it still operates and in a growing state and in good health when they leave. Unlike Musk, that if he left, there'd be serious concerns of would Tesla provide. And the same when Iacocca was going to leave the Chrysler, what would happen? Because he was so entrenched as Mr. Chrysler or Mr. Tesla. And so we could look a little bit at that today. And leading with that, Alan Cahoon, our president, went to his gala dinner the other night and raised some funds. A wonderful man. And I have to admire Alan, what he's accomplished for this institution. We've had some dummies as presidents in the past, but he certainly has set a gold standard around here and has done wonderful things. I hope to get him in for a video before this course is over and talk. But he said some interesting things I want to challenge him on in that video. He talked in terms that, if I understood it, and we're going to find out when we talk to him, but his chat the other night, he talked in terms about his strategic vision and his strategy model. And he said he was surrounded by good people, and he just let them do their thing. Well, that flies in the face of everything I know and everything I think I'm going to attempt to share with you that I want you to consider, is that it seems to me like iron filings on a white piece of paper. If you let all the department heads and all the departments, etc., work hard, full of energy, wanting to go this direction, all those iron filings are pointing in different directions. You must have that magnet we've talked about, that leadership, that vision, that long-term goal that gets us all pointing in the same direction. You need that corporate strategy that we're starting to talk about. And so if I understood Alan correctly, I didn't hear that from him. So my hope is to get him in before you folks are finished and have a 30-minute clip, and that's one of the questions I'll put to him. And maybe clarity, maybe I'm mistaken, but he said a number of wonderful things that I think for succession planning and leadership would be worth sharing. So I'll try to get Alan in for a short presentation. Prime Minister May is doing her best A lot of opposition building up there, people that may have been asleep at the switch when the vote was taking place. Nevertheless, the referendum passed. Brexit is a done deal. They're supposed to be out of it. They say it's 95% complete. One of the impediments is Northern Ireland. There are 10 sitting members of the House, and May needs those 10 Northern Ireland folks to stay in power to keep her coalition together. And they don't want a hard border between North and Southern Ireland. And so we could watch for that. They've only got 5 more months to run. But that could have great implications for us and our markets and things of that nature. The warming up north that we have is interesting. A talk here with Labrador Inuit and the challenges they're facing as the ice dissipates and the difference it's making on the ice highways getting across and the foods that they harvest. And certainly our indigenous people up north in general are faced, like Huntington's clash of civilizations between Muslims and Christians that he talked about in 1994. We're seeing the same clash of civilizations in Canada's north right now with the indigenous people that live this way and hunt this way and for years have done this way. But as the global warming takes place and as the riches are found and the water's just off there of oil and gas and other riches, we've got businesses up there clashing and pushing and shoving up against them. And so it needs to be monitored, both for the ecosystem, but also the indigenous people need protection from businesses and roughshod and one thing or another. We look at that. And certainly the other thing that's happening up north, of course, is all this takes place. It needs, again, that intermodal transportation. It needs the infrastructure. It needs the highways to get the goods up there. And the difficulty is the muskeg is defrosting, and it's getting very spongy, like sawdust up and down. And the ice is going under it, so the heavy trucks are having more and more difficulty lugging stuff back and forth, and they're quite dependent on that in the absence of the dirigibles and things we've talked about in this class. And so it's a challenge. We could look a bit at Canada's North Indigenous and what we can do to assist. Slavery possessed HR, and probably a couple articles here on HR and all swirling around this situation in Turkey and the Saudis. But I don't know if I've mentioned it or not, but it's important that we understand the human rights that we point to, that we go up to President Xi, our Prime Minister pokes him on the chest and say, you're not following human rights. We should understand where those human rights came from. And one of the principles that drafted this together, it was done under Roosevelt, and Roosevelt had his wife, Eleanor, in charge of the commission to put it together, and she in turn tapped on an Ontario doctor and said to the doctor, can you do the first draft of what human rights should look like? And of course, from the Anglo-Saxon Judeo-Christian background, he took the best of all that and said, well, here's what the rights look like. And went back and at the time of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, and shortly thereafter the human rights and the United Nations being established, Roosevelt, last man standing, the powers to be in those days, said these are the human rights. But of course, the countries that were weakened down at that, like China and a bunch at that point, had no choice but accept these are the human rights. You're going to become a member of the United Nations. And so we have these values that really a country like America, 1776, what's that, 250 years or so, Canada, much the same, those are based on our culture and rights, 400 years worth maybe. And then we go to ancient cultures of China, 2,500 years worth of culture and their view of human rights. And we say, these are the rights you have to accept, very ethnocentric. These are the rights, yours don't count. So I'm not making a case for it, but I'm saying that if you come to the other side of the hand, you have to understand a little bit the Saudi perception of rights and the Chinese perception of rights and the Indian perception of rights may not exactly be the same as our perception of rights. I'm not saying one's good or bad, I'm just saying that's how we get here, and there's a clash on human rights. And so that's one story, but over here they talk in terms of 2.8 million women in slavery in the Middle East. They're mothers from Africa desperately trying to earn money to support their children and husbands in their home country. Passports are taken away from them. Sexually abused, beaten, forced to work without pay. Another 20 million people in China and Pakistan and India are in similar circumstances. And these aren't, and the article makes the point, these are not being perpetrated by that common cause today of privileged white men. This is happening globally, slavery. We talk in terms here as an example in Saudi, a 30-year-old a British nurse working in Saudi, a British nurse working in Saudi, had a drink. And she initially denied her guilt, but eventually admitted that, yes, she had a drink. She's a British national. And so they sentenced her to 800 lashes for changing her testimony. It's one thing to drink, but it's another to give a false declaration. 800 lashes, and that's the culture. And so that's what we're faced with, and we have to get some sensitivity to the culture, and culture changes slowly. Okay, that's that piece. Put that one down here. Now, this was a short article that caught my eye, and the civil servants in Canada, they're increasingly isolated from the public. It goes on and says that the public presence and voice fades from bureaucratic view. The isolation encourages the civil servants to captured by special interest groups and pursue their own interests. The Bank of Canada built a separate wing, so outsiders can't come in to the headquarters but have to go to the separate wing outside for conferences. You can't get into the library, even though the taxpayers fund it. The Parliament buildings, the symbolic structures like the Parliament building and bombings and things like that, rightfully so, but since 9/11, that has morphed not just into the Parliament buildings, but almost every provincial and federal building you can think of generally have a commissionaire sitting at the front who wants to see and have you sign in, sign out, etc., etc. And these barriers, these impediments to you interacting with the people you pay to serve you, is getting more and more difficult. And as the isolation, the article makes the point, as the isolation takes place, they're drinking out of the same bathtub. Same thing we see in Washington today. They don't come out and intermingle with the voters any longer and get messages from the voters because they got these barriers, impediments to that. But they deal with themselves behind doors and talk to each other. And they generally are professional, and the civil servants are generally well paid. And so they may just be losing touch with, I call it affectionately, Billy Lunchbucket out there, the fellows who are working hard and the girls that are working hard trying to make a living. They may lose a sensitivity what problems and challenges they're facing. Certainly the private sector, we know the difference. We don't put barriers up between us and our customers. We need to know our customers. Our sales force are our first line of intelligence gathering. I want you to go out there and sell to my customers. And when you come back, I got to debrief you and tell you what you're hearing from the customers. I need that input so I can effectively tweak my strategies. But the government says, no, I don't want to hear that. I'll talk to lobbyists. I'll talk to each other. I'm kind of a professional. I'm well paid, and I'm okay. But I don't want to leave the Beltway and go out into the thing. And so they go on to this whole full-page spread about workers. And as a result, in fact, it says here the federal workers in Ottawa are primarily concentrated in Ottawa, and they're from the Ottawa area. And they're bilingual Beltway communities across the Quebec border and the Laurentian elite. And so it's not surprising then when Ottawa wants to pass gun control legislation that the folks in Alberta that need rifles, whatever, to take care of the farms and critters that are ruining their fields. Even my little garden, I've got raccoons and deer and all sorts of stuff come in and just munch away. And yeah, I want to shoot them occasionally. Haven't yet, but I sure would like to when they start destroying my garden. In any event, I guess my question for you here is, have the civil servants, both provincially and federally, withdrawn, isolated, polarized themselves so much that they've lost track with the people they're supposed to serve? They make it more difficult to talk to us. In this province, the head of our government, our whole government headquarters, is sitting on the south of an island, Victoria, away from the masses, which is the major city of Vancouver, and they're sitting here. And we have this water moat and a very expensive trip back and forth and time-consuming. If you want to get over here to put a demonstration on or something in the Parliament building, it certainly takes the steam out. You just can't walk downtown and do it. Anyway, it's a worthwhile story. We'll leave that one alone for now. I still have a few more minutes, so let's go on cannabis. Credit agency warns about prospects. There's so many firms out there doing it. We've talked a bit about this. Much like the race on bitcoins when it first came out, the explosion. Same thing as on cannabis. Everybody's got a good story to tell, and many are making a barrel of money, many are losing, and many are going to lose indeed. And as you get this spurt in growth, and it starts to mature somewhat and get the frontier race is over, mergers and acquisitions come into play. So I expect to see a number of mergers and acquisitions take place in the cannabis field. SNC-Lavalin is trying to reshape its company if a criminal trial affects its share price. SNC-Lavalin has had a series of a couple of bad decades of ethics and bribery and problems, and it's a major Canadian engineering firm. 10% of its revenues come from Saudi. There are a bunch of really good folks in engineering, but among that, they have transgressed. Certain members of it have transgressed, and has brought the name, the brand, and disrepute in big time. And now they've got another court case going on, so they may have to reshape the whole company to consider this. And from our perspective, what we learn from that, of course, is that all you have to sell is your brand in life. You only have your brand to sell, and you can destroy your brand in 15 seconds, in 15 minutes, after spending 30 years growing it. And so you want to be protective of your brand, no matter what the temptations would be. Telecom win in Calgary, a court case over the 5G network. Calgary said, if you want to use municipal properties, you've got to talk to us, get permits, etc., etc. The 4 largest telecoms went to court, said no, and the court upheld. And so basically, Section 91, Section 92, 91 is for the feds, 92 is for the provinces, sets out, enumerates the list of powers that went at the time of Confederation, 1867, to both sides, as well as any residual clause that anything that wasn't accounted for, anything that wasn't foreseen, like telecommunications, goes to the feds. And so it's not for provinces that are a creature of the provincial government to make a ruling on this. Here we had gold, a call from one of the CEOs of a gold company is calling for more consolidation in the gold industry. As you know, gold has been hammered down around the $1,200 an ounce level from highs of $1,800 not too long ago, and it's been hammered down, and so all the companies are feeling stress and tight. So once again, when you get this fierce competition and a limited number of customers and $1,200 an ounce, we're going to see more mergers and acquisitions, companies that don't have the deep pockets. And in there'll be some interesting little opportunities to make some dollars for you and I if you pick the right gold company. I've got some thoughts in mind, but I'll keep those to myself. But share some if you've got some thoughts. I'd be interested in reading. Canada's Post. Small business called for a quick end to a rotating Canada Post. Every year at Christmas, seems a little earlier this year, but every year at Christmas you can count on Canada Post going on strike. 50,000 people work for Canada Post. 50,000 people work for Canada Post. And again, like we tried to talk about the CBC this week on is it still necessary, and the $1.8 billion it is we give them as a grant every year. Do we need 50,000 people delivering the post? Now, I know small business need that, but as we move into this new industrial age we're talking about, if we move to digital currencies we're talking about, it seems to me I get packages of flyers, but I get very little correspondence anymore. It's the email, etc., etc. Now, in businesses, it's different. Some checks have to be mailed out and back and forth. But I'm just wondering if we couldn't drop it down to twice-a-week delivery and cut. Certainly, when I grew up, we had mail twice a day, morning and afternoon, as well as on Saturday mornings. It was just the post came. And today, it's getting more and more less service, but more prices to pay for the price of a stamp. And I'm wondering if we couldn't roll that back a little bit into something along the lines of 2 deliveries a day. In any event, what do you think? Trump's metal tariffs are pushing disruption in the marine business, particularly in aluminum boats and things like that. It adds a 10% cost to aluminum boats coming back and forth over the borders, and it's quite a concern to some of the small boat building companies who are wondering what to do about it. LNG is another tariff, same thing we're just talking about, that LNG Canada wants to ship a lot of this stuff out, but again, with the tax going through the States, it's causing some concern and puts in jeopardy maybe the new pipelines for that. Donald Trump made some comments about the feds down below, the feds who set. We should understand, unlike the Bank of Canada, which is a creature of government here, and is sort of government, in the States, it was a private concession, a private firm, given about, I think, 1920s, 21s. It was given to Rockefeller and a bunch of cronies. They got the right in there to open up something called the Federal Reserve. It's not a government agency, it's just a private company, but it's the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve gets the right to determine how much money should be printed in the basement, gets the right to set interest rates in America, and it's controlled by private parties, not by the American government. And so Trump's somewhat frustrated that since he's been in, there have been 6 increases in interest rates. and inflation's not running away down there, et cetera, et cetera. And his concern is that if you keep bumping up the interest rates, that's a cost to small business. It's an impediment to growth, and he's doing what he can to make this growth take place, and the high interest rates are starting to slow that down and cause some concerns. And at a certain point, a tipping point, if you go too far, you can bring this down. And there's no question, it's been a long climb, growth period up, and everything has to sort of resettle and regroup and before it moves higher again. So there's no question that will happen. But he's concerned and expresses his displeasure with the Federal Reserve action of just maybe too many interest rates coming out. And of course, the parties to be that write this press, again, this is the Globe and Mail. I've said before, it's so anti-Trump, it's crazy. But they've come out with the idea that other presidents haven't done that. But of course, President Obama wasn't faced with 6 rises, 1 every quarter. And so, of course, President Obama didn't do the same sort of complaining. But anyway, we can look at the federal government in the States, we can look at interest rates here in Canada, and the impact it's going to have. It certainly is an issue. Here's a startup which caught my eye. Interesting, it's glasses. We've had the heavyweights. Google tried it, Apple tried it, setting proper head glasses in place, not with a lot of success. And 2 young folks, Aaron Grant and Matthew Bailey, from a Waterloo lab, Canadian, seem to have found the right recipe. So they've received funding, $120 million, from the Amazon Group and Intel and a couple of other investment firms in Canada. They've hired hundreds of people, and they seem to be getting ready to put out new glasses they call focals. And new focals comes with a wonderful array of things you can do. Your thumb acts as the controller, index finger, you can move a little thumb joystick around. The loop, it's got potential for 3D scanners. It's also act as your regular glasses. It's got a whole series of things built in there that they seem to have found the recipe for, and they're on the cusp of moving this forward. And I think the cost of these units are going to be in the order of, price point is $1 less than $1,000 a pair. Now they've got kind of thick bands on here because all the chips and things are in the sidebar on the side on the what's this thing called on the I forget. Anyway, that's a sign of age. Frailty of mind sets in. Anyway, I guess the message we get out of that is the need for all of you to remember that you have to run paranoid. You have to run quickly. Your competition is not the old IBM folks, etc., the blue chip collar that they used to be. It's the new little startups like these 2 young men who have come from nowhere and are doing what Google and Intel couldn't do. They've found the recipe for it. And so that's your competition these days. Only the quick and the dead. Netflix is going back to the market for another round of debt this year. This is another $2 billion they want to keep on making streaming videos as they're trying to make their own videos and get in the game. And it was a good idea. But it intrigued me as I thought about that for a few minutes, that they're branching off this integration into now making their own movies. Was it a wise move? Because they're going up against Amazon and others with deep, deep pockets who are also doing exactly the same thing. And I guess that speaks to the idea of Amazon being a monopoly and the ability to drive small companies out like Netflix. So it's an issue there. We could talk about that. But I'm wondering that why are we doing this? You have to watch when companies decide through mergers and acquisitions or to do new vertical or horizontal integration into their organizations. Is it an equal thing from the CEO? CEOs like to have a greater span of control. My company is 500 people rather than 200 people. But if there's no synergy, if it's just 2 + 2 = 4 by this new thing, adding new videos to the portfolio, then don't do it. There's got to be synergies. 2 + 2 must equal 5. If it does that, then it kind of makes sense. And so I'm looking at that, but they're jumping into, and we'll talk about more in this class, a red ocean. It's fierce, the competition is tight, and it's much better, is there something else they can do by adding to their value proposition curve, things we talked about in our little tool thing? Can we find spots in there that we can add, reduce, adapt, introduce new attributes to, and find some blue ocean? And we'll talk about a blue ocean workshop later on. I've got it up there in the bonus section, I think, for you to look at it. But I think I'm getting concerned anyway what they're doing in that, and we could look at, particularly in this idea of rising interest rates on this money and things like that. So worth looking at. Okay, I'll wrap this up quickly. Immigrants are coming back across the border down south. This whole invasion. I heard today, I'm going to repeat the number. I'm not sure it's right. It was, keep in mind, this is Tuesday of the week prior to you looking at this. But I heard something, the crazy figure, collectively 100,000 people coming. I don't hold that, don't cite that. But the number is growing. The number is large of invaders coming to the American border with some sense of we're allowed to come in. And so it's going to bring this all to a head just as the election's coming, and I don't know who's going to win as a result of this, but it's certainly an issue. But the numbers are getting large, and we can look at that. With respect to the trade deal, Angus Reid did a survey, and 1/3 of the Canadians are pleased with the agreement. 45% are displeased with the agreement. I think the spin the federal government put on it is now wearing thin, and people are looking at it. And so now what we find is that particularly with respect to Americans, they found that in 1980s, about 49% of those polled had a very favorable or mostly favorable feeling towards Americans. In 2016, 2 years ago, it's down from, or it's up from the correction 62% back then to down to 49% now. That's actually dropped. The feeling towards Americans has dropped significantly since the 80s to 2016. And not surprising when we talk like last week, a captain in our military who served in Afghanistan, served side by side with the Americans, worked with the CIA, had top clearance, finds himself incarcerated for 75 days, still trying to get out of it. And so it's incidents like that that causes us concerns, having been good neighbors and good partners and good soldiers in arms together, that we seem to be losing our way a little bit. BC had 3 tsunamis, 3 earthquakes. Yeah, the other night we had 3 earthquakes in a row. One was 6.9, one was 6.6, the other was a little less, just off our coast. And we have this Juan de Fuca plate where the 2 plates are supposed to slide underneath each other, and it happens regularly, sort of every 100, 150 years, and we're past due for one here in BC. And it leads me not so much to the earthquake, but the need for earthquake kits, and it leads me to the idea, concept of pandemics. This idea, and I'll talk a bit about the polio scare in Canada and the States, albeit only a small number of cases, but our hospitals aren't equipped to handle pandemics, and we're only a plane ride away. And so does your organization, does your family have earthquake or pandemic plans to deal with it? Because you're going to be on your own for a great number of days. And we kind of spoiled up here because we don't have hurricanes and typhoons blowing through as they do in the southern part of the States. But a pandemic, as we experienced in Ontario about 10 years ago, could cause us great concern. So we could look at that today. Do we have a plan? Farmers in Alberta are rushing to get their snow crops in. This was interesting. Transgender cyclist sparks a debate. Rachel McKinnon, transgender cyclist, won the Masters Tracking Cycling World Championship for ages 33 to 44, and a Canadian one. And as a result, folks weren't happy with that. Some weren't happy. She was born a male, had the operations, etc., received it, and is now treated as a woman. But the bronze medalist, Jen Wagner, stood up and complained publicly, saying it's not fair. The silver medalist said it was done honestly and accept the decision. But I think the bigger question for us is is transgender and these sort of competitions. Is it a fair fight to for transgender folks to be competing against other women in this particular incident? And so it's a question we could look at. Folks, I think that's enough for now. I want to talk a bit about the Robin Hood case if I can. I've posted my notes on the Robin Hood case, both this one and the next little case you do, are just context cases, a chance for you to practice, talk to your colleagues, either online, where I can zip in and out and have a little look, but I'm not going to participate very much, or do it offline in however you practice on your teams. And then on Fridays, I'll give you my thought. If you have to work on the weekends, don't look at my thoughts, don't open it up until you've finished turning your mind to the questions for a few minutes and get some sense and some doodles of what models and things would work. But hopefully it'll help you prepare you to do your own individual paper, which comes up for assignment number 3. Well, I think that's it for the day, folks. I hope you've enjoyed today. I'm certainly enjoying this. Discussions are busy. Keep it up. Having fun. Bye now.